The truth will set you free. The truth will set you free.
Hey guys, Paeter here from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. Right now I'm going to attempt to examine the Bible and dissect some of the churchy language we can really easily take for granted, digging into history and languages as I'm able anyway to try and get at the heart of the text so that we can hopefully see and apply at least some of what God has for you and I in these words today. Now, I'm not formally trained in Scripture. I'm just a guy using resources and a questioning mind to try and get at the truth, and that's something that we can all do, so I hope that you will do that with me. We've been studying through the book of Proverbs and have arrived now at Proverbs chapter 7, verses 21 through 27, and in the ESV that says, "With much seductive speech she persuades him, with her smooth talk she compels him. All at once he follows her, as an ox goes to the slaughter, or as a stag is caught fast, till an arrow pierces its liver. As a bird rushes into a snare, he does not know that it will cost him his life. And now, O sons, listen to me and be attentive to the words of my mouth. Let not your heart turn aside to her ways. Do not stray into her paths. For many a victim has she laid low, and all her slain are a mighty throng. Her house is the way to Sheol, going down to the chambers of death." Well, the prototypical adulteress in this scenario and elsewhere in Scripture, as I've mentioned previously, is also associated with false gods. So this passage and passages like it that primarily warn against sexual sin are also likely meant to have an application to other kinds of sin that would tempt us away from relationship with and obedience to God. So we're going to look at these verses with both of those applications in mind. Verse 21 again says, "With much seductive speech she persuades him. With her smooth talk she compels him." The prospect of having sex already has its own appeal, right? But the tempter adds to the appeal through the way she presents it. Why does she do that? Likely, I think, because she knows her target may still have reservations about having sex with her, even though he has seemingly put himself in a position to be tempted, as we see in verses 8 and 9 of this chapter. The target of temptation in this passage is not necessarily antagonistic toward God, living completely apart from God. He likely knows, at least intellectually, that adultery is wrong. The author, a Hebrew believer, is trying to warn his son about the dangers of sin, and so the context is presumably a warning from one believer to another. So as readers, we shouldn't think of this as a scenario that's only going to happen to non-believers who are living without any thought of God's will. Those who tempt usually know that what they want is wrong, or at least is perceived as wrong by their target, and so they often add persuasive and appealing language to the already appealing prospect that they're presenting. Verse 22 and 23 again, "All at once he follows her, as an ox goes to the slaughter, or as a stag is caught fast, till an arrow pierces its liver. As a bird rushes into a snare, he does not know that it will cost him his life." The language here presents an interesting and pointed metaphor. The animals, I think, may also have been chosen intentionally for their defensive attributes. The ox is strong, the stag is fast and agile, the bird has complete freedom of mobility, and yet all are led oblivious into traps that end their lives. Likewise, believers may think of themselves as having the strengths needed to avoid destructive sins, but they can still find themselves caught in a deadly trap of temptation. The liver, commonly considered a vital organ when this was written, is pierced in this metaphor, which would have been deadly to the animal. The reference to traps that cost him his life may be hyperbolic and intended to strikingly warn against the harm of falling into sin. However, it's worth noting that many sins, especially sinful lifestyles, do result in shortening a person's lifespan for a variety of different reasons. Okay, verses 24 through 27 now. "And now, O sons, listen to me and be attentive to the words of my mouth. Let not your heart turn aside to her ways. Do not stray into her paths. For many a victim has she laid low, and all her slain are a mighty throng. Her house is the way to Sheol, going down to the chambers of death." And as a side note, the term Sheol referred to the grave in the ancient Hebrew mind. That's what they used. Just a general term for death, where the departed go after this life. The parental expression, "O sons," is another reminder that these are words from a father who loves his kids and wants to help them avoid horrible pain and a terrible end. So this instruction is given out of love. Believers listening to this kind of warning might think that they are strong enough to resist temptation. But the author here implicitly says that many others probably thought the same thing. Her previous victims add up to a mighty throng, he says, and yet they came to a terrible end, not realizing that the appealing temptation they gave into, while perhaps not deadly itself, was the path that led to death. Okay, so what's in all this maybe specifically for geeks that we can take away from it? The writer seems to highlight in this passage that even the strong, or those who think they are strong, can be victims of temptation. Since I first started making content for Christian Geeks in 2006, I've been an advocate for employing thoughtful, scriptural discernment in the area of interacting with entertainment, repeatedly pointing to scripture that indicates the freedom we have to enjoy many forms of entertainment in ways that some Christians may see as sinful on our part. I've tried to make the case from scripture that those who are mature in discernment can enjoy and participate in things that maybe a weaker Christian can't. And yet, there is a danger that can easily creep into the heart of the stronger and more mature Christian. A pride that leads them to believe they are immune to certain sources of temptation, when on a given day or situation, they may not be immune. Even if we can see with genuine humility as we look at ourselves that we have a degree of discernment that some others do not, we have to avoid pridefully categorizing ourselves as mature or strong in our own minds. Paul does use the language of mature and weak when describing or contrasting some believers, but these would seem to be relative terms. You know, I may be mature compared to some Christians, but I'm an infant compared to others. And even things that have never tempted us before can surprise us when we think we are strong and immune to them. We just have different seasons of life, and something that maybe didn't tempt us before, we can find suddenly does tempt us or do some harm to us in some way in a different season of life. And like the youth presented in Proverbs 7, we can think we are stronger than we are, or that the danger to us isn't significant, and end up going down a dark and dangerous path. So if you're a Christian geek who has grown in discernment and discovered freedom to enjoy a number of things that seem to lead others to sin or temptation, that's great to be in that place. The freedom and maturity of that is a wonderful thing, but you and I can't ever let down our guard or be unwilling to examine and re-examine what may or may not be a source of temptation to us. Satan, I believe, is a tactical genius and will happily allow us to develop a sense of self-assuredness over a long period of time as he sets up a devastating trap. And he can and will do that, I think, using all kinds of people or circumstances in ways that we will never see coming. Thankfully, our God is loving, a loving, patient, forgiving, tirelessly forgiving Father, completely restoring us when we fall and guiding us away from danger if we're willing to listen and learn from Him. If you'd like some help finding a good church in your area, I would love to help you do that if I can. Online resources and communities are good supplements, but by nature they just can't speak to your particular situation like relationships in a local church can. The context for almost everything in the New Testament assumes that we're serving and building purposeful relationships in a local church. So whether you're in a church that just kind of lacks Bible-based intentionality or maybe not attending any church at all, if I can help you get connected to an authentic, compassionate, Bible-oriented church, I want to do that. You can email me at paeter@spiritblade.com, and we can look at some websites of churches in your area together.